Hello students, this is N.K. Thukral from Edupedia World. On business studies, the chapter of delegation of authority in organizing was discussed in the previous session. Today we will discuss on decentralization and centralization. Students, if you ask what is the meaning of decentralization, I can say that it means transfer of decision power. I mean to say, if a decision-making power is transferred from top level to below level, it will be meant as a decentralization. So, the question is, why decentralization is done in the organization? I can tell you that it is done because one person cannot effectively take decisions of the organization as a whole. So, he delegates his authorities and give decision-making powers to managers so that only due to pending decisions of top-level authority, the processes or functions of department do not stuck up. Mostly, I can say that in case of large organizations, decentralization is done and suitable also. So, decentralization means to move the center of an organization from a single place. A process is made under which decision-making responsibilities are divided among various levels of managers. Sometimes also decentralization can be viewed as an extension of delegation, as we have discussed students on delegation of authority, where delegation is given to the below level from the top level. So in the same meaning, decentralization as can be viewed as an extension of delegation. When a part of the work is entrusted to others, it is known as delegation, and decentralization extends to the lowest level of the organization. Now let's see what is the definition of decentralization. As you can see in the slide, I have definition given by one of the authors, Louis Allen. What the author says? Decentralization refers to a systematic effort to delegate to the lowest level of all authority except that which can be exercised at central points. So this is the definition given by the Louis A. Allen. And one of the further author, Earl P. Strong, what he says, decentralization means the division of a group of functions and activities into relatively autonomous units with overall authority and responsibility for their operation delegate to the other units. So out of this definition, we can simply say that decentralization is simply a matter of dividing up the managerial work and assigning specific duties to the various executive skills. Since we know that the authorities are distributed, work is distributed, and responsibility, authority, decision-making powers are delegated from top level to junior level. So one can ask the question, what is the degree of decentralization? So the degree of decentralization is determined by the nature of the authority delegated, number one, and how far down in the organization it is delegated, number two, and how consistently it is delegated. So the degree of decentralization is determined by the authority given. Let's take an example. If manager A in a company is given the authority to buy certain material worth rupees 1500, whereas manager B is allowed to do similar type of work to the extent of 4500, it is clear here that the degree of decentralization is less in case of A. Similarly, decision about the matters referred measure the degree of decentralization depending upon the power to take decisions vested in an officer without the need of getting consent of somebody else. Now students, let's go ahead. Let's see what is the concept of decentralization. Number one concept, we can say as a point that decision-making responsibilities are divided. As from definition itself, you can understand that the decision-making responsibilities are divided among us various managers. So it explains the manner in which decision-making responsibilities are divided among hierarchy levels. Another concept is decision-making authority is pushed down the chain of command. Here in decentralization, decision-making authority is pushed down the chain of command. That is, it is shared with lower levels and is placed nearest to the points of action. Another is organization is said to be decentralized if decision-making authority is widely distributed. As you can understand that in case of large organizations or banking institutions or various large private groups also, this decision-making authority is widely distributed because there are so many senior managers, so many top managers, so many top level management, middle level, low level. So decision-making authority needs to be distributed amongst everybody. So organization is said to be decentralized in that case if decision-making authority is widely distributed. Further, another point is complete decentralization means delegation of all decision-making functions to the lower level. So an organization can be regarded as greatly decentralized if the decisions taken by the lower levels are numerous as well as important. Example, you can say that in case of public sector undertaking, IOC, IA, NTPC, NHPC, there are so many large organizations like ONGC where the complete decentralization is done there because there are so many top level, middle level and low level managers, and decision needs to be delegated because decision making authorities needs to be there in those organizations. So an organization can be regarded as there we can say as greatly decentralized because decisions taken by the low levels are numerous as well as important also. Further, in case of such type of organizations where delegation is done at all levels, we can say there is a systematic delegation of authority at all levels of management, right? Further, managed at all levels enjoy freedom of decision making, and we can say that it is suitable for all these large organizations. So after knowing the concept of decentralization, let's go ahead see what is the importance of decentralization. You can see in the slide, number 1 point I have given is develop initiatives among subordinates. How it develops? Decentralized helps to promote self-reliance and confidence among the subordinates, because if written instructions is given by the top level to the junior level, what junior level will do? He will just follow the instructions. He will not take any initiative from his own because rules, procedures are given to him and he has to follow. There is no initiative. But in case of decentralization, when authority is given to the subordinates, it develops initiatives to take further decision. So it gives them greater freedom also to take their own decisions and to depend on their own judgment. A decentralized policy helps to identify executives with potential to become dynamic leaders also. Another importance is develop managerial talent. When the authority is decentralized, executives in the organization will get the opportunity to develop their talents by taking initiative, which will also make them ready for managerial positions. The growth of the company greatly depends on the talented executives. So we can say that decentralization creates a pool of qualified manpower who can be considered to fill up more challenging positions through promotion, etc. So it helps in getting the talent among the employees. So next important point is quick decision making. How it helps? Decentralization brings decision making process closer to the scene of action. This leads to quicker decision making of lower level since decisions do not have to be referred to the top level authority. So they are not required to wait for consultation or instructions from the higher authorities, and managers can take their own decision based on their own judgments, and they can take the decision and for the growth of the organization. Another point is relief to top management. How decentralization helps in relieving the top management of their burdens. So decentralization, I can say, relieves the top executive of the burden of performing various functions. Centralization of authority puts the whole responsibility on the shoulder of an executive and his immediate group. That is in case of centralization. Whereas in case of decentralization, it reduces these type of hurdles. This reduces the time at the disposal of top executive who should concentrate on other important managerial functions. So the only way to lessen their burden is to decentralize the decision making power to subordinates. So students, next point is facilitate growth. How it facilitates growth? Under decentralization, managers enjoy considerable freedom to manage the affairs of their departments. This allows them to function in a manner best suited to their department and promotes competition among the department also. At each department put its best efforts, the overall productivity increases and organization is able to generate more returns, and it helps in further expansion of the organization. Next point is better control. Decentralization ensures better control and supervision, as the subordinates at the lowest levels will have the authority to make independent decisions. As a result, they have thorough knowledge of every assignment under their control and are in a position to make amendments and to take corrective action. Feedback from all levels helps to analyze variances and improve operations also. In that way, the quality is there and the control systems are also there. So students, after discussing decentralization, now let's go ahead. Let's see what is centralization, as we can compare later on what is centralization versus decentralization. But here, first let us understand what is centralization. The centralization is said to be a process where the concentration of decision making is in few hands. So unlike decentralization, here the approving authority is only one. All the decisions are under the approval of top level. That's why it is said centralization. All the important decision action at the lower level, all subjects and action at the lower level are subject to approval of top management. So according to one of the author, centralization is the systematic and consistent reservation of authority at central points in the organization. Now what is centralization? What is the meaning? As you can see in the slide, meaning is given that centralization of authority refers to concentration of the decision making power at the top level management. Further, I can say that under centralization, the important and key decisions are taken by the top management and the other levels are into implementation as per the directions of top level. So decisions are taken only by the top level, and whatever they give the instructions, the lower level has to follow that. For example, in a business concern, the father and son being the owners decide about the important matters, and all rest of the functions like product, finance, marketing, personnel are carried out by the department heads, and they have to act as per instructions and order of the two people, that is father and son, because they are the owner of the business, and whatever they say, the low level has to follow that. So this is called decentralization. Now let's see what are the features of centralization. Number one is decision of authority is retained at top level. Like just now I gave you the example of father and son, because they are the owner and they can be called at top level. So decision of authority, whatever they say, it has to be followed. So decision of authority is retained at top level. Another one is complete centralization, means concentration of all decision making powers at top level only. Another feature is there is no delegation. In centralization, there is no delegation of authority. No authority is given, responsibility, authority, everything with the top level, that is with the owner of the business. Another feature is suitable for small organization. So centralization process, it is suitable only for the small organizations. It doesn't help in case of large organization. So we can say that centralization is done only where the small businesses are there, or small business houses or institutions are there. Here, the degree of centralization depends upon the amount of authority delegated to the lowest level. Since in case of centralization, the authority to the lowest level is hardly given, so we can say in both in these cases, centralization as well as decentralization, only degree is depending upon the authority delegated to the next level. So we have discussed on centralization and decentralization. Now students, let's go ahead see what is the difference between centralization and decentralization. As you can see in the slide, the basic number one is meaning. In case of centralization, it refers to concentration of authority at top level only. So as we have discussed, the meaning of centralization means all the decision making powers at top level, whereas in case of decentralization, it evenly and systematic distribution of authority at all levels. Not one level, at all levels. So this is the major difference between centralization and decentralization. Another is DOA, I mean to say delegation of authority. There is no DOA, there is no delegation under centralization, whereas there is a systematic delegation of authority in case of decentralization. Next point is suitability. It is suitable for small organizations, as earlier we have discussed on meaning of the centralization, because as in the example I had given you, father and son of a small business house, so it is suitable for those type of organization. Whereas in case of large organizations like IOC, NTPC, EIL, etc., MMTC, DHL, they are very big large organizations, there only decentralization helps, so it is suitable there. Next is freedom of decision making. In case of centralization, no freedom of decision making at middle and lower level, whereas in case of decentralization, managers at all levels enjoy freedom of decision making. So students, these are the differences between centralization and decentralization. Since students, we have discussed earlier the previous session on delegation of authority, let us see what is the difference between delegation and decentralization. What are the points of differences? Number one is nature. Under delegation, it is a necessary act, whereas in case of decentralization, it's an option, policy, decision. That means delegation is necessary act because no individual can perform all tasks on his own, whereas decentralization, it is an option, policy, decision and is done at discretion of top management. Number 2 point is freedom of action. Less freedom is given to subordinates as control is in the hand of superior in the delegation, whereas in case of decentralization, more freedom is given to subordinates to take their decisions. Another point is status. The process is done as a result of division of work in case of delegation, and in case of decentralization, it has wide scope as it implies extension of delegation to the lowest level of management. Purpose. What is the purpose of delegation? What is the objective? The objective is to reduce workload of manager, whereas in decentralization, the purpose is to enhance the role of subordinates. Another one is responsibility. It is responsibility of every manager in case of delegation, whereas it is a responsibility of top level management. This is another big difference between delegation and decentralization. Another one is authority. The maximum authority is retained at top level in the case of delegation, whereas in case of decentralization, is systematically the authorities or powers or decision making powers are systematically distributed at all levels. Further students, I can say that on decentralization and delegation, that decentralization is not the same as delegation. Mind it, I can repeat it, decentralization is not the exactly same as delegation. In fact, decentralization is all extension of delegation, as initially I said. It is an extension of delegation. Decentralization pattern is wider in scope and the authorities are diffused to the most level of the management mostly, whereas delegation of authority is a complete process and takes place from one person to another, while decentralization is complete only when fullest possible delegation has taken place. For example, the general manager of a company is responsible for receiving the leave application for the whole of the concern. The general manager delegates his work to the personal manager and who is now responsible for receiving the leave application. In this situation, delegation of authority has taken place. So here, delegation. On the other hand, on the request of the personal manager, if the general manager delegates this power to all departmental heads at all levels, in this situation, decentralization has taken place. So this is a concept of difference between delegation and decentralization. Now students, if somebody asks you a question on complete centralization or complete decentralization, I mean to say, in somebody puts you a question that every organization is centralized as well as decentralized, how would you react? I can say that the reaction is that we can say like that, complete centralization means concentration of all decision making powers at top level, whereas complete decentralization means delegation of all decision making functions to the lower level. So this is what the complete centralization and complete decentralization is. An organization can never be completely centralized or decentralized. In order to increase effectiveness and to improve overall functioning, the organization must maintain a balance between centralization and decentralization. So students, let us conclude about centralization and decentralization. In spite of number of benefits we had discussed in case of decentralization, and also we have discussed the meaning of centralizations and also the differences between the three: centralization, decentralization and delegation. We can say that decentralization, although it is very important for large business houses, but in spite of number of benefits, it should be applied with a greater caution so that we may not fall into the wrong things. So decentralization must always be balanced with centralization in areas of major policy decisions. This I can conclude. So let's wind up the class today, and in the next class session we will take up the next chapter. So thank you. Bye bye.